Sakusa sighed, pressing Atsumu a little tighter. You're stubborn, you know that. And you're an idiot. They both chuckled as they shared a hug, enjoying each other's warmth. Sakusa slowly let go of Atsumu, gently stroking Atsumu's cheek with his hand until he eventually lifted his chin so they were looking into each other's eyes. He leaned towards Atsumu, gave him a small kiss on the cheek, and then placed another soft and gentle kiss on his lips. Atsumu's heart was beating fast and strong, his face was colored a soft pink, and his breathing was getting heavier. He pouted a little as Sakusa released his lips from him, which made the curly-haired man smile. He grabbed Atsumu's cheek and then moved his hand further to his ear, pausing just before his headset. We should turn this back on, the others must be worried to death. Oh, why yet? Atsumu was absorbed in Sakusa's dark eyes, his touches only leading him further into a trance. He was trembling all over, overwhelmed by Sakusa's appearance, unable to take his eyes off him. He pressed the button on Atsumu's headset while pressing his own at the same time to reconnect with Komori and Aiko. Kiyoomi. Atsumu. Sakusa couldn't take his eyes off Atsumu's honey-colored eyes. The blonde grinned at him as the two had Aiko's voice on their ears, which made Sakusa grin a bit himself. Are you guys crazy to cut the connection in a situation like this? Sure, we're fine, okay? We don't have time for further discussion now, on the next floor should be Seiki, right? Atsumu frowned as Sakusa spoke. He noticed the small cut on his face and gently stroked it with his hand, causing Sakusa to briefly wince and flinch. He reached for Atsumu's hand and kissed his palm, followed by a small smile, making Atsumu blush totally. Damn. I'm really head over heels for this guy. Komori sighed as he gave them more instructions. The others checked the whole building, he's not in the lobby where the actual party is and he hasn't shown his face otherwise. So he's 99% upstairs. Aiko's father should be here any moment, then I'll run over to you and reinforce you. Unfortunately, I can't see you from here. Sakusa frowned as he and Atsumu walked in Seiki's direction. Komori, don't you think this is all going too smoothly? What do you mean? There were hardly any guards positioned the whole way up, and now Atsu and I are almost at Seiki's place? That's way too fast. Atsumu frowned and looked worriedly at Sakusa. Komori hummed. Something's wrong here, I would prefer if you and Suzuki-san stayed with Aiko. Who knows what else awaits you upstairs, Kyo, the two of you definitely don't stand a chance. We can't take that risk. Sakusa stopped and looked around, searching for anything out of the usual. Omi. Atsumu was still looking at Sakusa worriedly. Shoo, be quiet for a moment. Atsumu frowned more and more and fixed his gaze on Sakusa, who seemed to be looking for something. They had already arrived in front of Seiki's office on the top floor when Sakusa leaned his ear against the door. Kyo, wait. Don't go in there until I make my way to you. Shoo shoo shoo. Sakusa listened carefully at the door, his whole body tensed and every sense sharpened. Atsumu stood beside him with his hands in his pockets, watching what Sakusa was doing. Suddenly Sakusa's eyes widened and he abruptly straightened up, looking at Atsumu in the eye in panic. A bomb. Sakusa gulped, his face turning pale and blank. There's a bomb in here, Komori. Do not come here, do you hear me? Stay where you are. Sakusa grabbed Atsumu's hand and turned with him to storm out of the building, when suddenly another initially unknown voice spoke over the headset. This is going to be fun. Sakusa stopped, his heart sinking into the pit of his stomach. That voice, he recognized it immediately. Farewell, Sakusa. Sakusa turned to Atsumu, who only looked at him questioningly and confused. Panic was written all over Sakusa's face. Fuck. He pulled Atsumu to him, hugged him tightly and threw himself on the floor with him when the bomb from Seiki's office suddenly exploded. Fortunately, the explosion was not very strong, which meant that the bomb was not very big. However, it was enough to devastate the entire floor. Atsumu slowly opened his eyes, his vision was blurry and there was a terrible high-pitched beeping on his ears. The blast wave from the explosion and the objects that flew around because of it must have knocked him out for a brief moment. Atsumu slowly straightened up and blinked a few times, he gradually regained consciousness, his vision became clearer and he was now finally aware of the sounds around him, the beeping disappeared. Atsumu felt two hands on his shoulders, he only now realized that Sakusa had been calling for him the whole time. He looked at his face smeared with soot and dirt and frowned as he noticed blood running down Sakusa's face. "Oh Omi, you are bleeding." Sakusa pulled Atsumu into a hug and exhaled deeply. He was relieved to see that Atsumu was okay for now. They were both more than lucky. "Kiyoomi, is he here?" Sakusa let go of Atsumu again and looked him in the eyes, panic written all over his face. He shook his head. "Our headsets broke in the blast, but Komori should still be across with Aiko. Atsu, we have to get out of here now, okay?" He looked at him, frightened. Atsumu nodded, totally overwhelmed by the whole situation. Everywhere scattered spots had caught fire, the entire floor was devastated and a continuous beeping sounded, which was probably the fire alarm. It was chaotic. Sakusa grabbed Atsumu's hand and turned around, just ready to leave, when he suddenly froze. He squeezed Atsumu's hand even tighter and began to shake, causing the blonde to frown and look worriedly in Sakusa's direction. He noticed a tall man, about Sakusa's height. He had brown straight hair that fell into his face and eyes like those of a snake. He wore gold jewelry on his ears and a gold chain around his neck over his black turtleneck sweater. He had to be very, very wealthy. Atsumu had no doubt, he was sure it was him. "SakuAtsu. Ah, welcome Sakusa, and Atsumu Miya, I presume? It's so nice to finally meet in person." Sakusa tensed, taking a step in front of Atsumu to protect him, hands still locked tightly together. Atsumu frowned and looked skeptically at the tall man in front of them. Everything about him radiated negative energies, he was scary, unpredictable, the danger coming from him could be literally felt. Saki played with a knife and threw a dirty and nasty smile at the two. "You're a little genius Sakusa, I was hoping it would take you longer to find the bomb. Now, unfortunately, you didn't take quite as much damage as I'd hoped, but..." Saki glanced at the knife and turned it a bit to inspect it more closely. He grinned again with that dirty fake smile, his gaze snapping to Sakusa and Atsumu. "I'll finish you off like that too." Saki lashed out and threw the knife in Sakusa and Atsumu's direction. Atsumu's eyes widened, he was still so confused by the explosion that he didn't realize what was happening until it was far too late. Sakusa pulled him down to the ground with him at the last moment to avoid the blade. Sakusa risked a quick glance at Atsumu to check if anything had happened to him. Once he realized that they had successfully dodged the attack, he immediately got back up and ran towards Saki while pulling a knife from his pants. He attacked Saki, which only made the latter smile mischievously, as Saki had a big advantage. He was unharmed. Before the bomb blew up, Sakusa and Atsumu had already fought a few battles, they were already wounded. The explosion didn't exactly help their condition. Especially Sakusa had taken a lot of damage, as he had thrown himself over Atsumu to protect him. Sakusa and Saki put up an equal fight, they were evenly matched, fortunately for Saki. If he hadn't battered Sakusa so badly until now, he probably wouldn't have stood a chance against him. He was able to dodge his hits, he had already knocked the knife out of Sakusa's hand. In a moment of carelessness, Saki landed a heavy punch to Sakusa's face, causing him to stagger back and slam into the wall. Sakusa's vision blurred for a moment, losing too much blood. As the bomb exploded, he threw himself protectively in front of Atsumu, in the process something must have hit him in the head causing a wound. The blood ran down his face and did not stop flowing since then. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make him dizzy. The punch from Saki brought him to his limits. He tore his eyes open and tried to get a clear view again. He recognized a figure about to hit him again, so he squinted his eyes again and waited for the hit. But there was nothing. Atsumu overpowered Saki and threw him to the ground, ramming a knife into his thigh, causing him to cry out in pain. Atsumu slid back a bit to put distance between him and Saki, but Saki grabbed Atsumu's ankle and pulled him back towards him. He gave Atsumu 2 powerful punches to the face, immobilizing him for a moment, but he was still conscious. Atsumu was in pain. He was in such tremendous pain that he was on the verge of passing out. He tried to resist his body, because he couldn't allow himself to do that now. He had to protect Sakusa with all the strength he had. Saki slowly straightened up and pulled the knife out of his thigh, then dropped it on the floor. He wiped blood from his lips and looked at Atsumu with disdain, before turning to Sakusa, grabbing a piece of wood that came loose from a door in the explosion and lashed out. Sakusa took an enormous punch in his side, so hard that it broke 2 of his ribs. He immediately fell to the ground and coughed, gasping for air. He curled up to protect his body. Saki grinned with satisfaction and threw the piece of wood away. He bent down to Sakusa and pulled his head up by his hair so they were looking into each other's eyes. Sakusa contorted his face in pain and anger. "It's been a long time since we last saw each other. I see you've already replaced Yuki." Sakusa gritted his teeth and scowled at Saki. "Don't you dare put his name in your mouth. Oh ho. Do you think I'm afraid of you?" Saki grinned widely, which made Sakusa's blood boil. No matter how he thought it through, the situation was hopeless. His only hope was that Komori would come, or one of the other men who would distract Saki, at least for a moment. But as long as he kept his full attention on Sakusa and Atsumu, they had no chance. Saki threw Sakusa back to the ground and gave him a kick in his ribs, causing Sakusa to wince once more in pain. He was shaking all over and tried to suppress a whimper. Sakusa had really been through a lot, putting himself in the most dangerous situations, but this, here and now, really topped everything. Poor Yuki didn't want any of this at all. Saki straightened up and looked down at Sakusa. "How often he crawled up to me and said that you were different. I had to make the poor boy understand who was responsible for the death of his parents." Sakusa bared his teeth and sneered. "You manipulated him, Saki, you took advantage of his weakness." Saki scoffed. "Weren't you the one who shamelessly used him? You used him to get over your depression and sorrow, right? Sometimes I really thought he might actually feel something for you. Absurd, isn't it?" Sakusa breathed heavily, looking deeply into Saki's eyes. "What do you know about feelings? You let a 16-year-old child run to its death. You let people die just to achieve your goal. You even let your so-called great love die, and you want to tell me something about feelings?" Saki gritted his teeth and slapped Sakusa in the face. Sakusa let out a short breath and smiled mockingly. "I have no problem with you killing me, because today we will both die, Saki. As soon as you get out of here, Komori will kill you." Sakusa now looked Saki in the eyes again and grinned at him contemptuously. "You're not afraid of me? Perhaps. But Komori is definitely someone you should be afraid of." Saki looked at Sakusa in confusion at first, but then he smirked. The smirk grew wider and wider until he burst out laughing. "Ha ha. Ha ha ha. You must have taken too many hits and fantasized too much, Sakusa." Sakusa's look was serious, he was completely tense. "Getting your parents out of the way was really satisfying, but getting you out of the way doesn't even let me put my happiness into words." Saki grinned at Sakusa and pointed his gun at him. "You should be grateful to me, after all I let you die first. That way you won't have to watch all the deaths of your friends." A few more goodbyes for your sweet Atsumu. Sakusa frowned and sneered. Maybe I'm actually a little grateful to you. Without you, I probably would never have met this wonderful person, right? Seiki laughed mockingly. Your love is disgusting, Sakusa. Get some sleep, forever, boom. Breathing heavily, Atsumu let the gun slip from his hand, shaking all over, and propped his hands on the floor to sit halfway upright. He was at his end, mentally as well as physically. Seiki grabbed his chest, frowning and gasping for air as he noticed blood on his hand. His own blood. Atsumu had shot Seiki in his lungs, causing him to fall to the ground by now and the gun to fall from his hand. Sakusa looked Atsumu in the eyes and noticed how the blonde was shaking. He grabbed his side to support his broken ribs and tried to pull himself up in torturous pain. He staggered past Seiki and just wanted to get to Atsumu, to hug him, to hold him close, to reassure him that finally, it was all over, to just kiss him. The blood was still running down Sakusa's face and dripping onto the floor, his head growing dizzy, due to the fact that the adrenaline was slowly wearing off as well. He fixed his gaze on Atsumu, the blonde boy was his aim. He didn't care what else happened as long as he had Atsumu with him. Sakusa frowned, however, when Atsumu's eyes snapped open and he came rushing in his direction. Boom. A shot caught Atsumu in the side of his stomach and another in his shoulder. He fell to the ground and hit his head, which caused him to pass out immediately. Sakusa turned around and looked in disbelief at the scene that had just taken place in front of him. His face turned pale, his eyes opened wide in shock, and his lips began to quiver. 𝒖𝒔𝒊𝒄. Seiki pulled himself up and grabbed the weapon he had dropped earlier. He was about to shoot Sakusa in the back, but Atsumu managed to push him aside at the last moment, only to be hit himself. Sakusa froze. He crawled to Atsumu and pulled his lifeless body into his arms, hugged him tightly, tears falling onto Atsumu's face. Sakusa felt the warm blood leave Atsumu's body and flow over his hands. And no. He saw the blood spreading on the floor, not stopping to run. No. Sakusa panicked. He immediately took off his jacket and pressed it against Atsumu's wound in his stomach to somehow stop the bleeding. Then he took off his t-shirt, tore it apart and tied it around Atsumu's wound on his shoulder to stop the bleeding there as well. Sakusa felt the pulse on Atsumu's neck with one hand, and with the other he continued to press the jacket to his wound. The pulse was still there, but weak. He leaned toward Atsumu's lips and checked to see if he was still breathing. Again, the breath was there, but weak. Sakusa embraced Atsumu's face and stroked his cheek. Come on Atsumu, wake up. Sakusa's eyes filled with tears. His whole body was shaking and he felt insanely sick. His heart sunk in the pit of his stomach, his eyes looked pleadingly at Atsumu to wake up again. Hey Atsumu, please. Sakusa sobbed, tears fell down Atsumu's motionless face. Sakusa stroked a few strands from Atsumu's face, desperately trying to bring him back to consciousness with his gentle touches. Atsumu, you can't leave me now. Sakusa kissed Atsumu's lips, but he didn't get kissed back. More and more tears flowed from Sakusa's face onto Atsumu's. The blonde was just lying on the floor, not moving. Everything was covered in blood, it was a massacre. Hey Omi. Are you crying for me? I love you Atsumu. How pathetic. I didn't even manage to tell you that I love you. Don't leave me Atsumu. And in the end I didn't even keep my promise too. You really deserve someone better than me. Atsumu don't. Hey Omi. Stop crying. It's not worth it. I'm sorry. Atsumu. I'm sorry Omi. I'm sorry that I also have to leave you.